RWBY just aired the second episode of Volume 9 over on Crunchyroll, and we're just deep enough into the story that I feel like it was time to make a video breaking down all of the similarities as well as differences between the strange new land of Ever After and the story of Alice in Wonderland, which this volume takes large inspiration from. My name is Deep Cut, hit that subscribe button, and let's jump into it. Volume 8 ended with the RWBY gang falling off of the bridges that Ambrosius had made into the Dark Void, after which they washed up in a strange fantasy land called Ever After. What's interesting to the characters is that this is actually the exact name of a fairy tale world in a book they all read as children. RWBY, of course, is largely about how fairy tales are used to disguise very real information important to the world of Remnant. In the past, we explored the fairy tale of the Four Maidens and the real power that they possess, and even the story of Salem herself is a long-standing fairy tale in RWBY's culture. What's interesting, however, is that the story of Ever After seems a lot more literal and well-kept than the other stories of the world. When they arrive in Ever After, they meet some of the characters of the book with the same names and descriptions, but they are somewhat older, indicating the original story of the girl who fell through the world was accurate and that a lot of time has passed since it came out. Now, time may move differently in Ever After, allowing for the tale to be very, very old, but it may be a more modern fairy tale in Remnant as well. Just before RWBY washed up in Ever After, we see a mysterious young woman did too. This is believed to be Neapolitan, whose semblance has the power to disguise her as anyone. In the opening for Volume 9, we see an image of Neapolitan fade to this girl on the shore, indicating that this is what Neapolitan naturally looks like without her semblance. In the same opening, we see images of this girl in a montage of Ever After visuals, giving the impression that she, Neapolitan, has been here before, and has a history with this place. This caused a lot of fans to connect her to Alex, the name of the girl who fell through the world, which was first brought up in a conversation between Oscar and Ozpin back in Volume 8. What little they discussed of it was about a girl who fell through the world and came back sad, which I believe to be a version of Salem's story, as she fell into the darkness of Remnant, but this may instead be a reference to Neapolitan coming back changed from her experience here, perhaps being what led her to become mute. From here, someone else who had been to Ever After with her may have written the story about her experience. Perhaps this shady figure we can see in the background of this photo with her in the Volume 9 opening. This is interesting because the real-life Alice in Wonderland is not a fairy tale in the traditional sense, in that it's not some much older oral tale that was written down later like many of the Grimm fairy tales. Most of us are familiar with Alice in Wonderland as the 1951 Disney film, making us associate Alice with the stories of Cinderella and such, which have much more vague origins. Alice in Wonderland, however, was an adaptation of two books by Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. The books are generally categorized as literary nonsense, and while they do have very solid themes and symbols, other interpretations are very debated and even a bit controversial. The genre of literary nonsense implies that the use, or rather misuse of words in the book is done entirely for the sake of humor, but Carroll seems to present his puns and wordplay as a way to actually teach children the various ways in which clever people operate, presenting them as absurd appetizers for very real word games they will see in the world as adults. Wonderland characters as a whole use nonsense and silly wordplay in order to confuse, trick, and then play the victim. The goal of Wonderland characters is to keep you trapped in their nonsense for as long as possible, oftentimes just for their own entertainment, but sometimes to carry out a larger goal or just to exploit you. A great example of this in RWBY is the Little Mouse, who has parallels both in the 1951 Disney film and in the book. In RWBY, this mouse constantly misunderstands her, playing innocent about it like RWBY is never being concise enough, while also being extremely vague and misleading herself. In the end, RWBY is consistently seen helping this little mouse more than this mouse really helps RWBY, promising to be a guide, but not knowing even how to get back home from where they are here in episode 2, and needing RWBY and the gang to keep carrying her. The goal of Wonderland characters is to trick you with their own words, convince you that yours are not concise enough, even though they are the generally accepted use, and then alienate you by acting offended. When a Wonderland character acts offended, this puts the outsider, like RWBY, on defense, not wanting to offend, and in fact, wanting to help to make up for it. This causes the outsider, like RWBY, to play into helping out the Wonderland characters in any way they can, hoping to get just a little bit more information in return, even if it's not nearly worth what they are giving. This is done by Little acting extremely afraid of the very word of cats. So much so that Ruby feels she has to be on guard about everything she says and choose her words carefully, not just to be concise, as this little mouse seems to need, but also not to scare or offend. In the Alice in Wonderland book, fear is present in the mouse, but not as exaggerated and running away like in the movie. Instead, the mouse is more offended and lashes out at Alice as if she is silly for not having considered the ramifications of bringing up cats next to a mouse. The response is still exaggerated, but with the focus on being offended, with Alice having been put in her place for daring just to bring up this norm in her life that someone else should be equally understanding of. From the trailer, we also see that there will be a Cheshire Cat-like character in the show. The Cheshire Cat is the most interesting character in the Alice in Wonderland film for me because of how helpful but also deceitful he is. His goal is to ultimately just annoy the Queen, it seems, who sees herself as the center of all things in Wonderland and is happy to do so with Alice as his scapegoat, someone to get in trouble for him. In the books, he doesn't sneak into Alice's trial, however, but is also on trial himself, with the court arguing over whether or not you can behead a disembodied head, since that's what the Cheshire Cat can become. The Cheshire Cat is someone who helps you only to screw you over, and if he himself gets in trouble, can easily escape it. And based on him running alongside the girls in the opening, he will be an important part of the story in Ever After this volume. Now, in the books, Alice has two adventures, one in Wonderland and the other through the Looking Glass. One element very important to the Looking Glass story was a game of chess, with many of the characters in the book just being chess pieces and Alice herself being a pawn. If Alice could make it to the other side of the board by the end of the story, she'd become a queen. And Ever After, this story seems like it will play out by the upcoming subplot of the Puppet King, which episode 2 set up by having the Ruby Gang joining some toy soldiers for a party. Surrounding him in the opening and promotional materials is the theme of chess, and I imagine one of the characters will have to face him in a chess match in the next episode, as episode 2 ended with Blake explaining that Alex had to defeat the king at his own game in order to keep getting closer to the tree that they believe will help them get home. This Puppet King may also be vaguely inspired by the king from the original Alice in Wonderland who served alongside the Queen of Hearts. Obviously, even though he is king, the Queen of Hearts is a more important character in the book and film, and the king seems to be just a figurehead, explaining why this toy king is just a puppet himself. He's probably a puppet for a real source of knowledge or authority behind him. The chess pieces as characters are scattered throughout the Looking Glass novel, but for Ever After and Ruby, the White Knight in particular appears to have been merged with the White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. What's interesting is that in Ruby, this character is not a native to Ever After, but instead appears to be Jean himself. Fans were quick to speculate that he was appearing in Ever After one of the trailers seemed to show parts of his armor in one shot. In the opening, we see him appearing separate from the girls among old-fashioned clocks, similar to the White Rabbit's pocket watch from Alice in Wonderland. Jean appears to be one step behind the girls all season, always late, such as the rabbit is constantly singing about in the Wonderland film. Further emphasizing this is John's old shirt of Pumpkin Pete, the rabbit from the cereal that Pyrrha was featured on. So many of the characters, even back then, had connections to fairy tales, and it gives the impression that this was a long-planned arc for Jean, dating to even back then, and makes me curious about what other characters have backstories and big plans that they're going to unravel in the next volume. Further connecting Jean to the White Knight of the books is this rusted knight that is featured in the opening of the volume, which many fans expect Jean to end up being underneath the helmet. The White Knight in the book is also described as being very clumsy, something Jean seems to embody from the very beginning of the show. The White Knight in the Looking Glass book is a lot more helpful to Alice and is often said to represent the author of the books himself. The White Knight is seen as a sort of last guide through childhood, a teacher or mentor figure trying to get you to proper adulthood. This, in the book, is represented by Alice making it to the other side of the board and becoming a queen, as happens in chess. However, when she does, the White and Red Queen just end up arguing about whether or not she is a real queen, the way you work so hard to become an adult, just to be told that you're not a real adult by the time you get there. Here in Ruby, I think this will follow Jean being the White Knight we see in the opening, the rusted knight, if you will, always one step behind the girls, but trying to get ahead to help them. We know Ruby will have a dark moment facing her past self, perhaps it just being Neapolitan in disguise with her semblance, but it will be an intense moment for her after the last 9 volumes and everything she's been through. Ruby set out to be a hero, but got wrapped up in a battle for the lives of everyone in Remnant, and it feels like they're losing, and now she's lost in Ever After. Jaune, I imagine, will be the one to come in and rescue Ruby and the girls at their darkest moment, reminding them of what they are becoming, and setting up how, like with Alice, they will still have to battle on the other side to prove that they can really win. Somewhere along the way, we will also meet this caterpillar with his cool little wings. In the Wonderland film, he appears as a smoking caterpillar that becomes a butterfly, and advises Alice on how to grow and shrink using a mushroom, but also confuses and tricks her like the others. In Ruby, I imagine him to be someone they go to seek after defeating the king, either because that's just what Alex did next in the original story from their world, or because the king is revealed to be a puppet king as discussed before, with there being real authority out there beyond him. Perhaps this caterpillar, or perhaps the yet-to-be-revealed Queen of Hearts figure. The caterpillar confuses Alice in the book, asking her who she is and making Alice realize she's beginning to forget who she is, losing herself in all of the nonsense, being so confused by words and questions that always mislead that she has a hard time understanding the basic definitions she held as they related to herself. Finally, we have the strange creature that the Ruby Gang fought in episode 1, known as the Jabberwocker, a reference to a poem in Through the Looking Glass. The poem is written off as nonsense and doesn't play much into the book itself, but the monster does make an appearance in the 2010 film where Alice fights in a climactic battle. In the show, it seems connected to the strange book, perhaps similar to the book Alice read in Through the Looking Glass, a poem that perhaps set this monster free here and ever after. But what do you guys think? Let me know your Wonderland theories and thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you next week.